windstorms. They come in all forms. Hurricanes, cyclones, and freak wind and rain. These are the stories from people who work in extreme weather.
I just lost a big window.
It was just like a bomb went off.
And nobody is coming to save you.
And the storms they'll never forget.
Wham! Crack! Bang! Bang! Bang!
Holy we're going to die.
Plus, the how and why behind the world's worst weather.
Mother Nature is one mother.
Hurricane Katrina was an extremely destructive and deadly Category 5 tropical storm. It was one of the 5 deadliest hurricanes in the history of the United States. As Katrina hits the coast, its front right quadrant, which held the strongest winds, slammed into Gulfport, Mississippi, devastating it.
The difference between a cyclone, a hurricane, and a typhoon, they are all the same, but they occur in different ocean basins. In the North Atlantic and Eastern Pacific, we regard these cyclones as hurricanes. But in the Western Pacific, so off of Taiwan, the Philippines, and Japan, they designate these storms as typhoons. And then in the Southern Hemisphere, by Australia and even into the Indian Ocean, they are known as cyclones, but they are all the same thing, just with a different name.
George Karunas has lived a rarefied life. As a professional storm chaser and videographer, he's traveled to all 7 continents, capturing extreme weather phenomena, and has perhaps literally seen it all. Throughout his 25-year career, bearing witness to Mother Nature, he's had some close calls. But in 2005, covering Hurricane Katrina, his job landed him directly in the crosshairs of a deadly storm.
Hurricanes are the strongest, most vicious storms on Earth. They are marine weather phenomena. They form when you have very warm water at the surface and you have thunderstorms that form and they cluster together, and the spin of the Earth, the Coriolis effect, causes these clusters of storms to congeal together and form this rotating mass with a calm central eye of low pressure. A really strong hurricane can have sustained winds that approach 200 miles an hour. In the case of Hurricane Katrina, the storm surge was 10 meters above normal, 28 feet. That's the height of about a 3-story building.
The storm surge is the reason why Hurricane Katrina was deadly. That water had nowhere else to go but completely into Louisiana and Mississippi.
In my career as a storm chaser, I've experienced about 20 different hurricanes, but this one is the one I will never forget.
August 26th, 2005, Gulfport, Mississippi. George Karunas and his storm-chasing colleagues arrived to report live updates of Hurricane Katrina as it hits the shores.
This is George Karunas. We're down here in Mississippi getting you up close and personal with Hurricane Katrina.
I ended up teaming up with some friends from Canada and some other associates from the US. And the weather forecast for Katrina was so good that we were able to drive from Toronto all the way down to the Gulf Coast and know exactly where we needed to be. Gulfport, Mississippi.
George and his team choose Mississippi rather than New Orleans to record the storm.
The weak side of the storm is the side that hit New Orleans. The strong side hit Mississippi, where I ended up. When a hurricane is coming ashore, it rotates counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. So the strongest part of the storm is going to be the right front quadrant, where you have the rotational speed plus the forward speed. And that's where we want it to be, either right in the eye or just to the right of the eye. Once we're in Gulfport, Mississippi, we have to try and look at the forecast and see if we have to relocate somewhere else. So we're looking at all of the computer models. But more importantly, we're scoping out bunkers, good places where we can ride out this hurricane.
The U.S. National Weather Service issues a dire alert.
An inland hurricane wind warning is being issued for the next 12 to 24 hours.
So we knew this monster was bearing down on us. And one of the scariest things of hurricane chasing is when you get in position and you're waiting for the storm. And you know that even if you leave right now, you're still not going to be able to escape the storm. We call it the point of no return.
The winds are now at 130 miles per hour. The team looks for a safe but advantageous location to ride out the storm, but still be able to record it.
And I found this perfect building. It was a multi-level parking garage, steel-reinforced concrete. This thing was basically a bomb shelter.
When a hurricane hits, go to a shelter that is designated by the government officials that is deemed safe. These are usually brick or concrete in structure, and these can withstand the immense forces of the wind, but also it's inland, so it's further away from the storm surge.
They park their vehicles in the safety of the garage and start prepping their gear.
The best part was that this parking garage had open sides, so we could experience the winds blowing through it, but we could still hide in these little nooks and crannies and shelter ourselves. We'd have to worry too much about the walls collapsing in on us.
Due to potential storm surges and water rising in the city, the only direction for safety is up. A multi-level parking garage appears to be the safest place to ride out the storm. Or is it? Katrina makes landfall in Gulfport, producing winds of 118 miles per hour and causing coastal storm surges of over 30 feet. As the streets begin to flood with ocean water, the parking garage appears to be the perfect hideout.
The parking garage was, I believe, 5 stories tall, which was great because as the floodwaters came in, we could reposition our vehicles and drive up higher and higher. So whenever the winds shifted or if the flooding came in too high, we could reposition. Despite all the warnings, I felt very confident about this particular structure. So it ended up being basically our bomb shelter.
The National Weather Service now issues news about the current storm and its destruction.
They were talking about things like appliances and small cars becoming deadly airborne missiles. They were talking about human suffering on a scale that is unimaginable. Any livestock left outside will be killed. I've never experienced wording this strong coming from an official government warning. And that was the signal to me that we were in pretty deep. And we didn't know if we were going to survive the next 24 hours. But there was one thing we knew for sure. The place where we were standing was about to become the most dangerous place on planet Earth.
August 26, 2005, Gulfport, Mississippi. Hurricane Katrina's winds, reaching 120 miles per hour, are pummeling the shorelines. Water levels are rising. George Karunis and his storm-chasing colleagues are reporting on the hurricane for news outlets.
Really pick it up right now. It's a huge system. This is the mother of all storms.
They are protecting themselves in an elevated parking garage.
So what you have to do is find some type of shelter and then put yourself in the path and let the storm overtake you. And hopefully the building that you chose is a strong enough bunker to withstand the storm.
George and his colleagues realize how bad this hurricane really is.
Once we read that warning, we realized the gravity of the situation.
Hurricanes are devastating, and it really doesn't matter what stage the hurricane is at.
See that really really get a feel for what's going on here.
We could hear the wind start to pick up, get louder and louder. And then you could start to hear the whistling of the wires, the smashing of glass, and the rumble of the building starting to shake.
As these wind speeds begin to pick up and the circulation begins to spin faster and faster, we now have a Category 5. It's not just the winds that are very devastating that can easily move houses off of their foundation. We now have storm surge to worry about. Think of it as a hurricane is like a giant straw. So it lifts up and sucks up the sea. So a storm surge can go many, many kilometers inland as long as the hurricane continues to maintain its strength. It's a very serious, and it's also the most deadliest component within a hurricane. That's intense erosion along the coastal areas, intense flooding that could last for days, even weeks, power outages, and people just without food and clean basic water for months even. The storm surge associated with Hurricane Katrina, this was the deadly factor with this hurricane.
We were there for a variety of reasons. We were sending reports back for the Weather Network. We were documenting the entire storm from start to finish as filmmakers to show people how bad these storms get, and hopefully they'll heed the warnings the next time a storm like this comes around. Because of the construction of this particular building, there are lots of little corridors and stairwells and sheltered areas where you can get out of the wind, but the howling wind is mere feet away from you. So it's a perfect vantage point to be able to do some live reports. Because this was a multi-level parking garage, we were able to reposition our vehicles. So as the storm surge flooding came in, we were able to reposition so that we didn't completely damage our cars. They were our lifeline. At the end of the storm, that was going to be the only way for us to get out of there. As the winds ramp up and we reach the maximum intensity of the storm, to get from point A to point B, I literally have to crawl across the ground. Because if I were to stand up, I would have been blown away like a kite. The wind was that strong. And it's not so much that the wind is blowing, it's what the wind is blowing. It's full of debris. There were pieces of sheet metal flying around like helicopter blades, which we nicknamed the decapitator. There were pieces of office furniture coming out of the nearby bank building. The winds are so strong, you can't even see across the street. Every time you step into the wind, it's a struggle. You're being hit by debris. Every raindrop hurts. You have to worry about tree branches. There are a million things in your mind, and you don't know which is going to be the next unseen thing that comes out of the murk to kill you. I don't think I've ever felt so trapped in my life. We were about a half a mile inland, and we still had water that was up to my waist. Because the winds in a hurricane, they rotate around a central point, as the storm progresses, the winds are going to constantly shift. So if you position yourself or your vehicle in a place that's safe right now, an hour from now, the wind is going to be impacting it. So we had to constantly move our vehicles, position them to new places. This storm was more intense than anything I had ever experienced. Once the storm surge flooding started to inundate the parking garage, that's when things really ramped up. I did not know if I was documenting what was ultimately my own demise. We didn't know if we were going to survive the next few hours. It's like being in a blender for 8 hours. You can hear the sound of buildings just being smashed, glass breaking, debris. It was surreal. During the middle of this storm, it was so ferocious that there was absolutely no way that any kind of emergency service could possibly get to you. 911 was off the table. It wouldn't take much to kill one of us, all of us. The oppressive feeling of the storm trapping you in this one location is hard for me to put into words. You can't step outside because you're gonna get blown away. You can't drive out of there because the floodwaters have come up. There is literally nowhere you can go. You're at Mother Nature's mercy.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
Now that the storm is over, George can finally witness the devastation and destruction.
I am blown away by what I've seen. It looked like a bomb had gone off. There were trees down everywhere, arcing power lines. We could smell the gas from gas leaks. And literally the town was just smashed to bits. I'd never seen that kind of widespread destruction.
1,833 people lost their lives. In addition, Hurricane Katrina left thousands of people homeless, destroying 800,000 homes.
In all of my years of storm chasing, I still have not seen damage like that from a storm. This was a widespread tragedy. I like to document extreme phenomena. They only become natural disasters when they affect human populations and habitations. A hurricane that's spinning out to sea, that's not a natural disaster. It's just the earth trying to equalize itself. But when they impact towns and cities, that's when they become disasters.
Hurricanes can hit fast and furious when approaching mainland. What happens when a powerful typhoon hits a cluster of small islands? The Philippines is the most storm-exposed nation on Earth due to its position along the Ring of Fire typhoon belt, a large Pacific Ocean region where many of Earth's volcanic eruptions and earthquakes occur. On average, 80 typhoons form over the tropical waters near the Philippines, with about 19 per year entering the country.
You can expect a typhoon to form at any time, at any given month in the Philippine area. And this is what we saw with Typhoon Haiyan.
Storm chasers are known to primarily chase tornadoes, but Josh Morgerman is different. He chases hurricanes and typhoons.
I've been chasing hurricanes for over 25 years.
All of a sudden, just boom, just out of nowhere, the wind just picked up again really fast.
I don't just chase the United States, I don't just chase North America, I chase everywhere. So I'm going to East Asia, I'm going to Australia, every hemisphere, every continent, hunting down the most dangerous storms in the world. I've been inside the jaws of about 35 or 40 hurricanes, and I would say this day was one of the worst.
The Philippines are susceptible to hurricanes mostly because of where they are situated and how their country is distributed. It's a whole bunch of islands that are speckled about, and every single one of these islands is in a tropical area that's prone for hurricane activity. These waters can generate typhoons year-round. It's not a hurricane season like what we see in the North Atlantic. They, on average, get about 9 to 10 typhoons each year, and that's not even counting the ones that just brush the islands occasionally. They can see upwards of 20 to even 30 storms form in this area. In many cases, because these storms have a lot of ocean to grow around within the Western Pacific, is that they grow to these massive sizes, even greater than what we see in the North Atlantic at times.
hurricanes thrive on warm water and a certain upper atmosphere environment that has a very low wind shear. The Philippine Sea, which is the body of water to the east of the Philippines, is this perfect breeding ground. Any cyclone that enters that sea just seems to explode into a monster, and Haiyan was no exception.
Tacloban City is the most populated city in the Philippine province of Leyte. There are over 240,000 residents in the most eastern cluster of islands in the Philippines. November 8th, 2013.
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
I will be checking in.
Josh arrives at his hotel in Tacloban City.
Put it on my credit card there. Yep.
The Philippines is the world's ground zero for powerful typhoons. There's no country on Earth that is hit more frequently by very violent typhoons. Usually my first hint that I'm going to be chasing a hurricane or a typhoon is that I see it in the computer models. The computer models are like a crystal ball showing what might happen in the future. What was unique about Haiyan was that it showed up very, very early on. The computer models 2 weeks before it hit were showing this really intense typhoon crossing the Pacific like a bowling ball and just crashing into the Philippines. And what was incredible was how accurate they were so far out. It was like they just sniffed that this was going to be a really unique event. In this part of the world, in this time of year, in the fall, you expect typhoons to get very strong. So to some degree, Haiyan was what one would expect. What was unusual was how powerful it became. A lot of times when hurricanes and typhoons are moving, they actually move in a zigzag. They wobble a little bit, and it makes it hard to figure out exactly where the center is going to cross the coast, and that's where I want to be. The interesting thing about Haiyan was that it had a very strong steering pattern, and it moved really fast in basically a straight line, so it was fairly easy to figure out, okay, it looks like Tacloban's going to be ground zero or very close. So that's where I decided to set up for this, and it was a recipe for disaster.
Many, if not most of these residents, live in simple structures.
Hey. I'm okay. I'm okay.
Hurricane Haiyan was not only headed straight for the islands, it was headed straight for the residents, who had nowhere safe to go.
In many cases, a lot of shelters and evacuations were not prepared far enough in advance for the residents. A lot of the residents could not leave their islands. There's no general way to protect residents on an island. The furthest that they can go is just slightly inland and still be in the storm surge direction.
So the typhoon was approaching, and I started to hear howling going through the building as the wind started to pick up, and that was the first sign that it was coming.
Okay, guys, I think the storm's gonna hit any minute.
It was like windy and rainy, and it started to get worse. And then it was just before 7 a.m. that the inner core of the typhoon arrived. It was this wall of wind and rain. That was the eye wall, the inner core of the typhoon moving in. And it just swept into the city, and all of a sudden the winds went just nuclear. You could hardly see like a block away. The wind was just roaring. Debris flying around, the whole building started shaking. Windows started to smash, doors blew off. It was hitting. I tried to get a couple of shots from the rooftop, but I realized that that wasn't safe. And I realized, all right, I need to go downstairs. So I went down to the second or third floor. And even that wasn't safe because the wind was just, we were in this tight urban area, and so the wind wasn't blowing in a straight line. It was ricocheting off the building, so debris was just blowing in every direction. And it was like being inside a tornado, basically. Flying debris is lethal. If something hits you, it's over. So in this area of the Philippines, you've got a lot of tin roofs on buildings, and those things just rip off, and tin is very lightweight, and it's also lethal. And so stuff like that was just blowing around in every direction, just scattering like confetti. After a while, it started to clear a little bit. It was still blowing like crazy, but not as much, but it was just enough so you could see the street below. And what we realized is the street was no longer visible. It was water. the city was flooding. And that's when I realized the storm surge was coming into the city. The ocean was invading the city. So when a hurricane comes ashore, the wind actually pushes the ocean water up onto the land. That's called storm surge, and it's very dangerous because it floods places where people live. And it just overflowed into the city. And when it overflowed, it happened very fast. So fast that people couldn't get out of the way. The street had become a river, and it was coming up, and it was coming up fast. I noticed this building across the street, just a one-story building. A door opened and people came out, some adults and some kids, and the water was really high. They were struggling across the street to get to our building because it was bigger and safer. And I was watching them and I just started to feel like, oh my God, they're not gonna make it. That was the point I realized I needed to stop just sort of observing this and documenting it, and I needed to help because people were gonna die.
November 8th, 2013. Hurricane chaser Josh Morgaman is in Tacloban City, the Philippines. Hurricane Haiyan is ravaging the island. Even worse, the storm surge has caused water levels to rise, putting local unprepared residents at risk.
So our hotel was like a bunker. It was a sturdy concrete building on probably the highest part of the city. The hotel had become basically a refuge in the storm. So I ran downstairs, and it was mayhem on the first floor. The water was coming up. Oh my God, this hotel. People were panicking. And by the time the people on the first floor realized what was happening, they could no longer open the doors to their rooms. So they were stuck in these rooms with the water rising. These had become death traps, and they were smashing the windows and they were screaming for help. I just felt like, oh my God, I'm gonna just watch people just die right in front of me. And I realized like I had to just jump in and try to help.
Maybe here.
So a couple other guys and I, what we did is we just jumped in that water and we went up to each window and we were pulling people out of the windows, the elderly, children, the disabled, whoever, and putting them on mattresses and then floating them to the main staircase to then get them up to the second floor. And one by one, we just went back and forth to just basically drag people out of those windows, and it just became this mad rush to get everyone up the stairs into the second floor. It was already, the water was like coming up, you know, it was like you're just wading through it.
Watch your step here.
And, you know, I felt like so protective, you know, just bring her up those stairs, you know, and we got the whole family upstairs one at a time. And then it was time to look for others because there were people trapped everywhere. It was total panic at that point, just people shouting and crying for help. And, you know, it's just a blur in my head. I only remember, it's like kind of trying to remember a dream, like I only remember little pieces. I feel like my entire memory of it now is just what was captured on video because, I don't know, I was in some kind of, I was almost like in a mental fog. I felt like I was just like a machine, you know, just trying to like get people to safety. It was this mad rush to just get everyone up to the second floor. You know, some of them, you know, we pulled out of the windows and ferried on the mattresses. I remember carrying a little girl up the stairs. I remember me and another guy carrying an old man in a wheelchair up. I mean, it was just like whatever we had to do. It was just one at a time, just getting everyone up to that second floor.
Good.
Haiyan was an incredibly powerful typhoon, but it was quite small and it moved really fast. And what was interesting was, as soon as we got everyone up the stairs, the water started to pull away, the storm was passing.
Typhoon Haiyan was a learning experience indeed, both for residents, visitors, and the government in general. So a lot of people were caught off guard. The government did not know how to explain carefully to the residents how dangerous this situation was going to be. This is not the first nor the last super typhoon to hit the region, but at the moment the government can look into building better structures, concrete or brick structures instead of wood or straw along the coastal regions, because these do not withstand the winds of a super typhoon of upwards of 250 kilometers per hour.
Thousands of people died in Super Typhoon Haiyan, and most of them were from the storm surge, that rise of the ocean onto the land. The tragic thing about that was that it didn't need to happen. If people understood beforehand what was coming and that storm surge was going to happen, they would have gotten to higher ground. I'd never witnessed destruction or human misery on that level. It was just beyond anything I'd ever seen, and it was almost like as a defense mechanism, my emotions just shut down. I just stayed really kind of cold and like focused, like, okay, how do I survive? How do I get home? And once I got home and I kind of had the luxury to have emotions, I just like broke down, you know, just the misery that I witnessed and what I was seeing on the news even, just like, I was just like weeping, seeing it all. It stayed with me a long time. I didn't want to chase again for a while. And after all my years of chasing, that was the weather event that changed my life.
Lake Erie is the world's 12th largest lake. But when storms hit, the lake is notorious for behaving more like an ocean, with waves reaching 25 feet and wind gusts over 50 miles per hour.
Many people underestimate the power of the lake during extreme weather. They underestimate the strength of the winds, the risk of lightning, and the size of the waves. In the summer, or winter for that matter, the temperature of the air over the Great Lakes is going to be different from the temperature over the adjacent land. And so when the winds come down, it picks up that moisture and it cools, and the water condenses and causes rainfall. They, on average, have 250 lightning flashes a year and 33 thunderstorms every year.
Andy Buss is a professional bass fisherman who's been fishing competitively for 18 years. No rookie to the weather, Andy has faced wind, rain, and thunderstorms while fishing over the Great Lakes.
I've been a competitive angler for about 18 years now, and for the last 4 years I've been blessed to compete professionally. I don't believe there's any weather that's too bad to go fishing in. On the lake, you have a pretty distinct advantage when you're reading the weather. You can see it hundreds of miles in advance before it gets to you. And I've always felt that someone who gets stuck in a storm, they made a bad decision. I spent 120, 150 days a year on the water. I've been in all sorts of weather conditions. I'm not an amateur. I'm not a novice when it comes to reading weather, but that all changed on September 19th, 2015. My boat's sinking. We're gonna die.
September 19th, 2015, Lake Erie, situated between the US and Canada. Andy and his partner head off into Lake Erie in preparation for an upcoming tournament. There was nothing unusual about this day. It was going to be just another day of fishing on the lake.
So my buddy and I were preparing for the Bassmaster Open on Lake Erie, which took off out of Sandusky, Ohio. We headed north, and we drove into Canadian waters, 22 miles roughly to get where we were heading. And while we were traveling, we were driving through 2.5, 3-foot waves. So we were driving roughly 30 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour. It was an overcast day. There was a slight breeze out of the west, and those waves, they didn't really slow me down. They were not concerning. I've been in 3-foot waves more times than I could count, and they were actually coming in the perfect direction. We were fishing maybe 3/4 of a mile on the east side of the island, and it was very calm. After about 2 hours of fishing, we looked off into the west, and I could see a rain cloud approaching, but it was just a rain cloud. It was still the morning. We knew stronger winds were forecasted later in the afternoon, but this was roughly 11 o'clock in the morning. I did not view this cloud coming as a threat. I thought we'd get rained on. That was it. It's not intimidating. There's not any lightning whatsoever. There's no thunder off in the distance. It's just gray. It looks like it's overcast. So we proceeded, and we did not have any reservations. I was not scared or worried. In my mind, that storm is not posing any kind of threat. And that rain cloud came on top of us. I mean, it was instantaneous. Boom. That wind just hit us so hard. It's like a fan turned on, but so tremendously powerful, it nearly knocked us out of the boat. It was that hard. It was so sudden, without any warning, and with it was torrential rain. And that rain was just coming at us horizontally. It was coming so hard, that wind was so strong, it was coming horizontally at us.
There was an extreme storm cell that moved across the lake. And when you have these storm cells, there is wind and changes in air pressure. That wind and air pressure interacts with the surface of the lake and causes ripples. And those ripples then propagate and become very, very large waves. And in fact, in some cases, you can actually cause mini tsunamis that sweep from one end to the other end of Lake Erie. And this actually happens 5 or 6 times a year.
In fact, due to the combination of gale force winds, large waves, and strong currents, there are close to 2,000 shipwrecks.
What's happening is that change in pressure pushes the water. You can imagine water sloshing back and forth in a bathtub. And so at one end, the water goes up, and the water is sort of pulled away, and then swishes back the other end. And so this is very hazardous. It can cause, capsizes boats. It causes what we call rip tides, which are, as that wave comes in, it then turns around and goes backwards. So it will pull people a kilometer out to sea or out to the lake.
An oncoming extreme storm was not a cause of concern for this experienced fisherman.
I'd been in some nasty things before, survived, came out okay, never had a problem. And it's a storm. And in my experience with storms, they never last forever. They never last all day, very rarely. They're typically an hour. And this storm, I had a hard time believing was, first off, I had a hard time believing it was a storm. In my mind, I saw it coming. This looked like rain. I probably should have been nervous and scared immediately, but I wasn't. I had a hard time comprehending what was actually happening. It took 10 to 12 minutes to fully comprehend what was going on. I'm a real competitive guy. This tournament, $50,000 plus for first place. And I am a real competitive guy. I am committed to winning. I'm committed to figuring things out. And I pride myself in being tough and overcoming. So when that rainstorm came on us and it was hit with such force, it was kind of a mentality of, hey, let's do it. Let's have some fun. Let's dance with Mother Nature and Lake Erie here.
However, this particular dance with Mother Nature was about to take a major dip.
Those winds had to be 50 miles per hour plus. My partner and I are not saying anything to each other, and we couldn't hear each other even if we wanted to communicate. It was so loud because, first off, the wind, but then the rain, and these waves are building momentum, and they're building momentum so fast and so suddenly. Literally in 10 minutes, I went from thinking I'm okay, there's no threat, and 10 minutes later, it's time to get out of Dodge because this is becoming hostile. It's becoming dangerous.
A sudden and severe wind and rainstorm is ripping across Lake Erie. Pro bass fisherman Andy Buss and his partner are in the middle of the lake in preparation for an upcoming fishing competition. But they are not prepared for what is to come.
I mean, it hammered us. I mean, it was instantaneous. Boom.
Because Andy has fished in all types of weather, at first, he was not concerned.
The waves, when we arrived, were 3 foot, and in 10 minutes, they're 7 to 8 feet in height. When I'm looking at waves that are at least 2 feet taller than me, we've got a pretty good idea how tall those things are. But I have been in 8-foot waves before. Never got nervous, never got scared. but these were different.
Lake Erie is unique because of its geographical location, because of its shape, the shallowness, and it is known for having the capacity to have very high waves, waves that are meters tall.
I was experiencing something I'd only heard about before. What I found myself in with this dishwasher effect that I've only heard of before. I've never seen it. I've only heard about it. What that is I'm on a shoal, and that shoal is surrounded by 30 feet. And what a lot of mariners don't understand is that when a wave comes across the lake, it may be coming across that lake for miles and miles, and that the force of that wave is actually many feet deep. And when it hits an obstruction, like a shoal that suddenly comes up to 7 feet deep or 7 to 8 feet from the surface, it hits it, and it causes that wave, instead of to roll like this, which is much, much easier to navigate through, it hits and it forces some, what I'll call crest. And so out in the middle of the lake, you have these 8-foot waves, 7-foot waves actually white capping. They're breaking over the surface. And when you turn your boat into that, what happens is that wave literally rolls on top of your boat. And it happens so fast. And at that point in time, we realized it's time to get out of here.
As the shallowest Great Lake, Erie's waves tend to spring up in a matter of minutes. These 10 to 25-foot waves are violent and unpredictable in nature, creating a huge risk of drowning. Swimming is not an option. With the 2,000 shipwrecks already at the bottom of Lake Erie, Andy knows there's a chance this lake can swallow his boat just like an ocean.
Hundreds of people have died in Lake Erie during storms, drowning, boat capsizing, and then also lightning strikes are all really dangerous risks that are present during extreme weather on the lake.
I'm 28 miles from home. I'm 5 miles east to the protected side of an island. And I had these 8-foot waves pouring on top of us. I had to turn my boat into those waves and go those 5 miles to safety, because there is no way I'm going to be able to navigate back to home. As I turn the boat into the waves, as soon as I come over that wave, you gotta understand, I go 8 feet up, my boat comes over, it now free falls 8 feet essentially into the trough between the next wave. But it's the dishwasher effect, which means the very next wave is coming at a 60-degree angle from my left. So I've got to very quickly navigate to the next wave. The next wave after that, I go over that wave. The next wave after that might be coming straight on, or might be coming from the left again, or from the right. So there is absolutely no pattern to navigate through. When it's so unpredictable, it's extremely challenging. And in a bass boat, where that water is made to flush down into the console area, and it would literally flood up to my ankles or even higher after almost every single wave. And mind you, I'm hitting a wave like this every 15 to 20 seconds. I've got 2 bilge pumps that'll pump out hundreds of gallons of water. What I didn't know is my automatic bilge pump, which I thought was running the entire time, is broke. And at that point in time is when I realized we're in some stuff now. The very back of my boat, it's underwater. Half of my outboard motor, my 250 horsepower motor is going to save my life, is underwater. That tells me that everything in my boat behind me is completely full of water. We're talking hundreds of gallons of water in my boat. And I look at my partner and say, all right, you can probably start bailing some water. So he grabs that and he starts bailing. And you talk about a perfect progression of things that just go from bad to worse. And my outboard motor sputters and dies.
With water flooding the boat and his main engine not working, Andy now resorts to an electric trolling motor. The future looks bleak for Andy. A flooded boat, 8-foot waves, and having to use an electric motor.
My batteries that are controlling my trolling motor and everything else on that boat are completely submerged in water. Only a matter of time before those short out. It's at this time where I realize we need help. I'll try 911. I tell them who I am, where I am approximately, and I'm gonna die. If you don't come here to help me, please come help me. And they say the magical words of, we're sending somebody for you. I'm like, well, thank God.
Andy decides it's time to call his wife.
I decided as a husband that she deserved to hear my voice one last time. And that's when I broke it down to her. I said, babe, I'm in a real situation here. My boat's sinking. I'm over 4 miles away from anything safe. The Coast Guard has been dispatched to come get us. We're gonna die. It was a conversation with a lady who is real special. We ended by telling each other that we love each other. And, you know, I'm crying, basically. I am crying. In that conversation, I'm telling her that I love her, and to tell my daughter how much Daddy loves her. And how much I love my boys.
"90 minutes after contacting the Coast Guard, they are rescued and towed to shore. Miraculously, Andy and his partner survived the perils of the storm.
I mean, the Great Lakes have outstanding fishing, but the storms are legendary. And the legendary part of the storms is that they do come without warning. Horrible weather doesn't just happen in the ocean. It happens on the Great Lakes. Now I am much more cautious when I get on the water, especially big water. Nasty things can happen on lakes just as much as they can in oceans. And my preparation, my knowledge that I had before I get on the water, knowing the weather and the possibility, alters my plans accordingly to maximize safety. I always respected nature beforehand, but I think maybe I confuse that respect with love too. I love it. Now my respect for Mother Nature is to also acknowledge how vicious and brutal it is.